The island smelled like sulfur before the first shot was fired. That should have been a warning. Iwo Jima was not a normal place. The ground itself hissed. Steam vented from cracks in the volcanic rock. The black sand on the beaches was so fine it swallowed men's boots whole. It did not look like a place where men were supposed to live. And yet, beneath that poisoned surface, thousands of Japanese soldiers had been digging for months, burrowing deep, building something that had never been seen before in the Pacific War. They were ready, or at least they thought they were. February 19, 1945, the sky above Iwo Jima turned gray before dawn. Somewhere out in the dark water, nearly 800 American ships sat waiting, the largest naval armada ever assembled in the Pacific. Aboard those ships, roughly 70,000 United States Marines stared at the outline of that small, ugly island and felt something they would not easily admit: fear. They had heard the stories: Tarawa, Peleliu, Saipan. Every island assault had been a bloodbath. The Japanese did not surrender. They did not retreat. They died in place and took as many Americans with them as possible. That was the way of it. But Iwo Jima was different. Everyone who had studied the intelligence reports knew it. The island's commander, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had spent months transforming this volcanic rock into something extraordinary. He had built over 1,500 rooms connected by nearly 18 miles of underground tunnels. He had buried artillery so deep it could survive days of naval bombardment. He had positioned his men not on the beaches, where they would be shelled to nothing, but deep inside the earth, where they would wait, silent, invisible, patient, until the Americans were packed onto the sand with nowhere to run. Kuribayashi had studied America. He had lived there once as a military attaché. He understood American industrial power. He knew he could not win a conventional fight, so he decided not to fight one. His goal was not victory in any traditional sense. His goal was to make the cost so high, so unbearable, so grotesque that American leaders would think twice before ordering an invasion of the Japanese home islands. He wanted to break American will. What he did not fully account for was what America would bring to his island. The Marines hit the beach at 9 in the morning. The first wave splashed ashore and met almost nothing. Some men looked at each other. Maybe this would be easier than expected. Maybe the days of naval and air bombardment had done the job. Then the second wave came in, and Kuribayashi gave the order. The island erupted. From every ridge, every bunker, every hidden tunnel opening, the Japanese opened fire. Artillery, mortars, machine guns, sniper fire. The black sand exploded around the Marines in geysers of volcanic ash and blood. Men fell in the surf. Men fell on the beach. The screaming of wounded soldiers mixed with the constant roar of incoming shells. The beach was only a few hundred yards wide at some points, and it was packed with men and equipment and vehicles that had nowhere to go. Survival in those first hours required something beyond courage. It required the absolute refusal to stop moving forward, even when every instinct screamed to lie down and disappear into that black sand and never stand up again. The Marines moved. They always did. But advancing off the beach was a different kind of nightmare. The volcanic terrain broke formations apart. There were no tree lines to use for cover, no rivers to orient by, just endless rock formations and ridge lines and invisible positions that poured death in every direction. Japanese soldiers in spider holes would let a squad pass, then rise from the ground behind them and fire. Machine gun nests that had survived the bombardment opened up from angles no one had anticipated. And the bunkers. The concrete bunkers on Iwo Jima were unlike anything the Marines had faced before. They were thick. Some had walls 4 feet deep, reinforced with rebar and volcanic rock. Standard rifle fire bounced off them. Grenades were not enough. Even light artillery sometimes failed to punch through. You could shoot at a bunker all day, and the men inside would simply wait you out, then cut down anyone who tried to get close. The Marines knew how to deal with bunkers. They had done it before. You get a BAR team to suppress the position, while a couple of men crawl close enough to throw grenades through the aperture, or you call in a flamethrower team and they burn it out. The problem was that standard flamethrower teams on Iwo Jima were being cut apart before they could get close enough to work. A man carrying a portable flamethrower had maybe 40 yards of effective range. To get within 40 yards of a reinforced Japanese bunker in open terrain, under fire, that was a death sentence for the man carrying the tank. Too many good men had already died trying. The Marine Corps knew this problem was coming. They had been wrestling with it since the brutal lessons of earlier island campaigns, and somewhere back in planning sessions and training yards in the United States, a solution had been engineered. Not a perfect solution, not a clean one, but one that could do what nothing else could. The M4A3 Sherman tank, modified and rebuilt around the most terrifying weapon in the American arsenal, a mechanized flamethrower system. The Marines called it the Zippo, sometimes called the Ronson, like the cigarette lighter. The name was casual. What it did was not. The standard Sherman tank was already a familiar sight to the Marines. Reliable engine, decent armor, useful for direct fire support against fixed positions. But Iwo Jima was eating standard Shermans alive. The terrain shredded tank tracks. Japanese engineers had buried anti-tank mines throughout the approaches to every major defensive position. And even when Shermans got close to a bunker, the main gun round would punch a hole, but the defenders inside often survived and kept fighting. The Zippo changed that calculation completely. The E4-5 flame gun system was installed in place of the standard Sherman's Hall-mounted machine gun. Some variants replaced the main 75mm gun entirely. The tank carried a pressurized fuel system, a mixture of napalm-thickened fuel that could project a sustained stream of burning liquid up to 150 feet. Not 40 yards, not a man sprinting across open ground with a backpack tank. 150 feet of fire delivered from behind 2 to 3 inches of rolled steel armor. The operator inside the tank was protected. The men who used to die getting close enough to burn a bunker out, they could stay back. The tank would go forward. 19 of these tanks arrived at Iwo Jima as part of the 5th Tank Battalion, attached to the 5th Marine Division. They were not glamorous. They were not fast. The volcanic terrain of Iwo Jima punished every vehicle that tried to move across it. The tracks threw rocks. The ground shifted under the weight of the machine. Drivers struggled to maintain traction on slopes made of loose volcanic ash, where a tank could simply slide sideways off a ridge and roll. But when they got into position, everything changed. The first time Marine infantrymen watched a Zippo go to work, there was a moment of absolute silence, the kind of silence you get when men see something that genuinely surprises them, even in the middle of a battle. The tank would rumble forward, absorbing small arms fire, advancing within effective range of a bunker or cave opening. The machine guns would suppress the apertures, and then the flame gun would engage. The sound was unlike anything else on the battlefield. A deep, wet roar, not the sharp crack of a rifle or the thump of a mortar, but something almost liquid and industrial. The flame came out in a sustained jet, orange and black and impossibly thick, and it poured through bunker openings, around corners, down tunnel entrances, into every gap and crack and breathing space that Japanese soldiers had counted on to survive.
Concrete walls that stopped rifle rounds meant nothing to fire. The temperature inside a napalm flame reaches over 1,000 degrees. Steel doors warped. Ammunition cooked off in chain explosions deep inside tunnel systems. Men who had survived days of naval shelling and artillery bombardment did not survive the Zippo. And here is the part that military historians sometimes note carefully, but that deserves to be said plainly. For Japanese soldiers who had built their entire defensive strategy around the certainty of their underground positions, the flamethrower tanks represented something almost incomprehensible. They had calculated for almost every American weapon. They had absorbed naval fire, they had absorbed air bombardment, they had accepted that the surface of the island would be destroyed and planned accordingly. They had not fully planned for a machine that could follow fire underground. Kuribayashi's tunnel system was his great equalizer, the weapon that neutralized American numbers and firepower by denying American soldiers a fixed target. A man underground cannot be shot. He waits until the enemy passes, then fires from behind. He lets a position appear to be destroyed, then re-emerges. The tunnel network was not just a defensive measure, it was a psychological weapon. It made American progress feel unreal, unsteady, like the ground itself was fighting back. The Zippo attacked that psychology directly. A tunnel entrance that had been used to resupply a position, to rotate defenders, to allow wounded men to pull back. The moment a flamethrower tank identified it and engaged, it became a death trap rather than a lifeline. The Marines began to systematically target every observed opening. The tanks would advance with infantry covering their flanks against close-range anti-tank teams, and together they would move through the landscape like a slow, terrible erasure. Japanese soldiers began to report the tanks in their communications. The word that circulated through the tunnel network was something like, and different sources translate this differently, fire vehicles. Some accounts describe Japanese commanders ordering men to prioritize the destruction of these tanks above almost everything else, including officer-level targets. That order itself tells you something. When a defensive commander shifts his priority targeting to a specific weapon system, it means that weapon system is working. The attempts to destroy the Zippos were desperate and costly. Japanese soldiers with magnetic mines and satchel charges tried to approach the tanks under covering fire. Some succeeded. Several Zippos were disabled during the battle. The volcanic terrain remained a constant threat. A tank that threw a track in a forward position could not be easily recovered and sat vulnerable while engineers scrambled to repair it under fire. But the tanks kept coming. The battle for Iwo Jima lasted 36 days. 36 days of some of the most intense close combat fighting in the history of American warfare. By the end, nearly 7,000 Marines were dead and over 19,000 were wounded. The island cost more American Marine lives than any other operation in the entire Pacific War. And yet, the island fell. Every major defensive position that Kuribayashi had spent months constructing was eventually breached. The mountain everyone now knows from the photographs, Suribachi, fell on the 5th day. The northern plateau positions, built into the most geologically rugged terrain on the island and considered nearly impregnable, fell one by one as the weeks went by. The Zippos were part of every major assault. They were not the only reason the island fell. Marine infantry courage, leadership at every level, naval gunfire, coordinated air support, the sheer refusal of American fighting men to accept anything less than total victory, all of it mattered. But the flamethrower tanks solved a specific problem that nothing else could solve. They reached into spaces where no other weapon could reach. They made underground invulnerable positions vulnerable. They gave Marine commanders a tool that allowed them to clear fortifications without ordering men to make suicidal rushes that would kill dozens to capture a single position. The human cost of using the Zippos was borne largely by the tank crews themselves. The men who drove and operated these machines understood very clearly what they were doing. The tanks were priority targets. They moved slowly. They required close-in support. Every mission forward was a calculated risk. Several crews died when their tanks were disabled and caught fire, a grim irony that was not lost on the men themselves. One thing that does not appear often enough in popular accounts of Iwo Jima is the psychology of the men inside those tanks, enclosed in steel, in volcanic heat, on terrain that could kill you whether the enemy fired or not, operating a weapon system that required absolute precision.
Too short a burst and you didn't reach the target. Too long and you exhausted your fuel supply before the next position. The tank commanders had to make real-time decisions under constant fire about fuel conservation and target priority. They had to read the battlefield through narrow vision ports while their vehicle was being hit with everything the Japanese defenders could bring to bear. They did their jobs. When the battle was declared over on March 26, 1945, General Holland "Mad" Smith, the Marine commander who had overseen some of the bloodiest island assaults of the Pacific War, said something that has been quoted many times since. He said that among all the Marines he had ever seen, those who fought on Iwo Jima showed uncommon valor. The full quote became the official citation for the entire division. The phrase, "uncommon valor," was a common virtue. There is a reason that phrase has lasted. The flamethrower tanks of Iwo Jima were not celebrated the way fighter pilots were celebrated, or the way the flag raising on Suribachi was photographed and reprinted on the front page of every newspaper in America. They were tools of terrible, close, ugly work. There was nothing photogenic about what they did. War correspondents did not linger on descriptions of what happened when those flame jets poured through a tunnel entrance. Editors did not run those images on front pages. But the men who advanced behind those tanks knew exactly what those machines meant. They knew what the casualty rate had been on previous assaults where the Zippos were not available. They knew how many men had died trying to clear positions by hand that a flamethrower tank could clear in seconds. The psychological effect on Marine morale was real. When the tanks were available and moving forward, men felt the mathematics of survival shift slightly in their favor. On the Japanese side, the effect was different and in some ways more strategic. Kuribayashi's plan had been designed to shatter American will. He had calculated a kill ratio that he believed would make the American public demand a negotiated peace. His intelligence about American losses at previous island battles was accurate. He knew what the numbers looked like. He knew that Iwo Jima, defended as he had defended it, should inflict casualties the American public would not be able to stomach. What he had not fully calculated was how American industrial capacity would continue to evolve during the war itself. The flamethrower tanks were not part of the original American arsenal at the start of the Pacific War. They were a response, an engineered, manufactured, deployed response to a specific tactical problem that had emerged from the lessons of earlier battles. The Americans took the painful lessons of Tarawa and Peleliu and Saipan, identified the specific problem that was costing lives, and built a machine to solve it.
That cycle, problem identified, solution engineered, solution deployed, was something that Japanese military planners had difficulty matching. Japan's industrial capacity, stretched across a Pacific empire fighting a multi-front war, could not iterate weapon systems at the rate that American industry could. By the time the Japanese military recognized a new American advantage and began working on a counter, the Americans had often already moved to the next iteration. The Zippo was a product of that cycle, and its effectiveness at Iwo Jima confirmed that the cycle was working. When Kuribayashi sent his final message to Imperial headquarters in late March 1945, as the last organized resistance collapsed, his words were formal and dignified in the way that Japanese military communications of that period often were, but the subtext was unmistakable. The batter had not achieved its strategic goal. American losses had been severe, more severe than almost any previous island battle, but American will had not broken. The Marines had absorbed everything that months of preparation and brilliant defensive engineering could produce, and they had kept coming. The flamethrower tanks had been a part of why. Kuribayashi himself led the last organized counterattack. He died on Iwo Jima. His body was never identified with certainty. The island that was supposed to be the fortress that turned the tide instead became one of the final proofs that the Pacific War had a direction, and that direction was not reversible. American planners took the lessons of Iwo Jima forward into the planning for Operation Downfall, the projected invasion of the Japanese home islands. The flamethrower tanks were scheduled to play a major role.
Casualty estimates for that invasion ran into the hundreds of thousands on both sides. The decision to use atomic bombs against Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 made that invasion unnecessary, and the Zippos of the planned home island assault were never deployed. But the legacy of what happened on Iwo Jima shaped those decisions. Every planner who looked at the casualty projections for an invasion of Japan looked at those numbers through the lens of what 36 days on a small volcanic island had cost. The battle proved definitively that Japanese defensive preparation could exact an enormous price from American forces, even when American industrial and naval superiority was total. It also proved that American forces would pay that price. The Marines on Iwo Jima were not the largest army in the war. They were not fighting on the most strategically important front. But what they demonstrated in those 36 days, the combination of human courage and engineered advantage, the willingness to absorb terrible losses while continuing to adapt and advance, became one of the defining images of what America brought to the Second World War. The black sand beaches of Iwo Jima still exist. The volcano still steams. The island is Japanese territory now, and access is restricted. The bones of men from both sides are still being recovered from the tunnel networks. Every few years, a joint American-Japanese ceremony is held on the island to honor the dead. The men who died there, Japanese defenders following impossible orders with extraordinary dedication, American Marines advancing into one of the most lethal defensive environments ever constructed, they deserve to be remembered honestly, not as abstractions in a strategic narrative, as men who made decisions in smoke and heat and darkness and did not turn back. The Zippos sat in the middle of all of it, slow, armored, pouring fire into the earth. They did what they were built to do, and sometimes in the history of warfare, that is enough to change everything. What do you think would have happened if American engineers had not developed those flamethrower tanks in time? How many more men would that island have cost, and would the decision to invade Japan have been made differently? Think about it and leave your answer below. The history is still being debated.